Alex Trudeau Viriato, you previously edited Man in the Arena, and I know John Bon Jovi loved that docuseries, and he wanted the same team for Thank You, Goodnight, the Bon Jovi story. So how did it feel to know that he essentially handpicked you for this?
It was a good feeling. I was standing right here when I got the phone call that John Bon Jovi wants you to tell his story. And you know, you go through a lot of emotions at that time, like that work paid off, or that, you took a chance on this other project, and now that's you're watching it come to fruition. And what does he want us to do, or what does that look like? What is Bon Jovi's story? What do I not know? And you kind of get into like excitement, research mode to figure out where you're at.
Mhm. Well, with docs, like you have to build the story yourself, and you guys started filming in like 2022, and that's when he started having his vocal cord issues and he has surgery. So how did you and Gotham Chopra, the director, like land on these parallel timelines for the series of, showing the band's rise, and then the present timeline with his health issues?
I think it goes to what I was just saying was that was the first thing I asked myself is what does this documentary have to say other than, oh, look how big they got in the 80s and everybody knows Slippery When Wet, and look, they made it to the top and look how great that is. It all kind of came together when he started having those vocal issues, and we realized that was going to be um, an A story and a B story, that we were going to take you through the 80s and we're going to have that fun. And that was great. But that would almost be the easier story to tell because we could find that archival, we could dig into that, and we could share the stories, and we could interview all the band members. But then there's this other ticking time bomb of his voice. Is John Bon Jovi ever going to sing again? And that's what I really wanted to tap into was people can't relate to being the greatest band in the world or rock star lifestyle, but they can relate to not being able to do the thing they love anymore. And you're watching that guy go through that in real time. He just so happens to also be John Bon Jovi. So you use it as a tool to either juxtaposition something that was happening in the 80s, look how great he was doing then, and look at he's having a hard time now, or to complement it. Similar challenges were happening back then to today. And that was really the balance of our A and B story and how often we would cut between the two to really create a unique story that had both the stakes of 2022 and the stakes of what they were going through in the 80s, and the hard work that it took to get there.
Hmm. Yeah, because like you said, when you're filming, you're obviously going through it in real time, and now we know like he's recovered and he's okay. But like when you're in that moment, like 2 years ago, it's like, what are you thinking? Like like the footage you were getting of this, and like you don't know where their story's gonna go.
Yeah, there was always an open-ended ending. I was also a firm believer that it also didn't really change what we were going to do up until
Hmm.
that point. Whether if at the end of a documentary he said I'm retired, I'm not going to do it. There was still a hero's journey to that point for the whole band and for him. And if he continued and was like I'm great and 100%, here comes the next tour, so be it. We would do that as well. But it was always a moving piece. Where are we going to end? Like what? Eventually, we have to stop making this documentary. We have to end somewhere, and it's not going to be we didn't believe it was going to be some final goodbye. We could see progress, we could see things. We had a hunch, but everything was a moving target. Or how the rehearsal's going to go? Was this going to be a good one? Was this because you don't always want to stay in the down? You needed to come up. You needed to go down. You needed to do that, but you never knew what what was going to happen with John's voice.
Hmm. One of my favorite scenes is after he has the surgery and he had just seen the movie Elvis and he loved it and he's reflecting on Elvis, the real Elvis, and how he had health issues, but he never lost his voice. And then he died at 42. And John says he'd rather still be here in his 60s trying to rebuild his voice and he wants to try. And there are so many raw moments like that from him. And it's really covering like a career of ups and downs, like you were saying. So when you get these real emotional moments from him, this footage, like are you thinking, oh man, this is definitely going in, like it's never getting cut?
Yeah, the Elvis one particularly was one of the first three scenes I had sent to John. So when John asked us to do it, we had one interview and then we had whatever archival we can get off the internet. And I made three scenes for cadence, style, music choices, and just kind of like, this is kind of how I see this going. What, is where do we want to go from here? And the Elvis one was something I really liked because I could tap into like that one sentence really meant a lot to me. Like, what is it that you have that you would be okay? You'd rather have these things than your voice. Like, what are those things? And that's the documentary. Like, that's part of John's story. Tell me what those things are that you'd rather have than just her voice and nothing else as his Elvis example. And Elvis pops up quite a bit. I put he's in an image in episode 1. He gets married at an Elvis chapel. I really tried to sprinkle little Elvis moments throughout because you can see him relating to him, singing, acting. There's a lot in there. I even had a temp Elvis track in one of the earlier cuts just because I felt like that was a thread. I know he says he doesn't want to end up with the fat Elvis, but there's definitely some connections there to him. Um, so yeah, that scene, along with the one on the couch, I remember when he's processing everything that this band means to all the people, and he starts to get teary eyed, and he says like, "I'm not going to let you see me like this," kind of a thing. I remember there was a suggestion one time, someone was like, "Oh, what if we cover it with all the people that he's talking about?" And it was like, "Absolutely not. We're not leaving the main character. He's trying not to cry. You never leave someone when they're trying not to cry. You don't cut to whatever they're talking about. That's completely irrelevant. Let them just sit with John. Let John be vulnerable. This is the kind of relationship that Gotham has built with John to have access to these kinds of moments. We're sitting. We're not cutting to anything."
Hmm. How much footage did you have between the interviews with him and all the band members and, like the managers, everybody,
A
Obi, and
lot.
then the archival footage too, because we see in the show that he's archiving stuff himself, so I'm sure he's like sending you stuff. It's like, here, this is the unused song for a Robin Williams movie.
Yeah, when you see the pictures of the basement, we thought it was going to be this like, all right, here's a big box of archival, get after it. But it was not like that. It was 5 clips here, 50 clips the different week, no clips for the next 2 weeks, and so you're constantly guessing what's going to come in, but you got to work with what you have because if it never comes in, you still have to have something to show. Excuse me. And uh, so many we had multiple interviews with John that were all over an hour long. Every band member did an over an hour, sometimes over 2 hour interview. And so you're just trying to comb through how you fit this into a 5 hour piece. And then the archival, sometimes there are archival moments which are much more rich, but you kind of have to spread that throughout. There's like people wanted to see these like raw behind the scenes of Slippery When Wet. And it was like, well, that didn't exist. They started recording on VHS and all these tapes for the New Jersey album. So like we can show that then. But something with the archival I wanted to do early on was not just limit it to the years that were being talked about. So in the 80s, I wanted to use interviews from John in episode 1, even though we hadn't chronologically got to that moment. As long as he was speaking on the chronological story, I would show you him in the 80s. I would show you him when the band was successful from an interview so that that style and that look gets sprinkled throughout the whole series. And the archival wasn't just limited to the one time they were in 1986. And all 1986 footage needs to go in the scene with Slippery When Wet. It could really live throughout it. So all the rich moments could be sprinkled as long as they were relevant and worked for the story.
Hmm. I also love how the other band members it's like they're in conversation when they're recounting, the past.
Hmm.
Like I love that editing style too.
Yeah, yeah, because we never wanted to be just John telling you the story and then everyone else gets to chime in. Oh yeah, I remember that, or I did it. I wanted it to feel like a conversation because they were never in the same room. Everyone got their own space to say whatever stories they wanted, and sometimes they would contradict each other, and sometimes it wouldn't line up. And it's not my job to tell someone that they're truthful or not, but I can't lose the audience. I can't contradict. So
Yeah,
it doesn't
that's
make any
that's just
sense.
their truth, how they
Yeah,
explain.
exactly. That's the perfect term. It's like their truth, and I have to let that blend together. And so you wanted to make it feel like they were talking to each other, even though they weren't in the same room. So I let David finish John's sentence. I let Richie chime in with all three of them. And you can cut between all three, and it feels like they're all just telling you this story that they really remember vividly. And I wanted them to feel like a band at all times, never John and then everybody else. It's
Hmm.
just everyone else together. Everyone gets a little bit of an origin story. Everyone gets to speak on these moments from their perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Well, lastly, what's your favorite Bon Jovi song?
Oh God. Well, I had to listen. I listened to all of them.
All
I
of
went
them.
through. I did. I listened. I went from Spotify. I went from the top to the bottom, and then John played some of the ones that we had never heard. Favorite. I was asked which one was my favorite that I didn't know of before the documentary,
That
and I
works too.
think Dry County was something that I had never heard of, and I really liked it. And it's funny enough, I didn't find a place for it in the documentary. Like you have all these songs, you're like, we're gonna play this one, that one, and some they just don't talk about, or they just don't have a moment to
Yeah, it's
live.
like it's like a B-side, like a deep cut.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was, and well, it wasn't even a deep cut because some people are like, "Oh my God, that song was huge out here." But for me, it was like I was born in 1984. It was 2 years. I was 2 years old when they were like skyrocketing. So I remember them from Crush in high school. So that was my first album, and then I had to go to Tower Records and buy the New Jersey album, and then I found them that way. So my experience of their music happens different than every other fan's experience, and like that was part of the filmmaking too, is not trying to appease all the fans and all the experience and all the songs, like, oh, you didn't play this song. That was going to be impossible, that we were never going to be able to make every fan happy because they all have different songs and favorites.
Hmm. That's a good one though. That not many people name that one, so
No, yeah, I mean, I could easily name the top 10, but what would fun would that be?
yeah. Well, Alex, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time.